For me, it started with that opening music, that slow, ethereal synth chord. At that time, BioWare was off my radar. I was, and still am, a PC gamer first and foremost, and to me it seemed like BioWare had abandoned my market to chase after the mass market console dollars. But when I heard that music and I saw those translucent images of the companions fading in and out, I was hooked. It has now been 10 years since I heard that music, and in that time Mass Effect became a beloved franchise, frequently listed in people's top games of all time. But its most recent iteration, Mass Effect Andromeda, had a slew of problems, and it now appears that Mass Effect, as a series, is dead. What happened? Why did it die? Let's get our hands dirty, open up that body, and take a look in this Game Objective autopsy. First, we need to make sure that it's dead. We wouldn't want to do an autopsy if it's still alive. And for that, we need to take a look at some actually decent reporting by Kotaku. Jason Schreier has written 2 articles lately about Mass Effect. First, talking to BioWare developers, all of them anonymous, about what went wrong with Mass Effect Andromeda. We'll get to that one in a minute, but first, most important right now is this piece. Not only will there be no single-player DLC for Andromeda, but BioWare has practically dissolved the Andromeda team and moved them on to other projects. And there are currently no plans for any future Mass Effect games. It doesn't take a genius to figure out that means Mass Effect is dead. Now, it may come back to life at some point in the future, but given the lead time on projects nowadays, and especially projects this big, if they're not currently working on a Mass Effect game, which they're not, then we're not going to see anything for at least 5 years at a bare minimum. This holds especially true if you take a look at Anthem, the new Destiny-inspired game that BioWare recently announced. This is a big project with their A-team behind it. On top of that, news recently broke that BioWare is hiring more than a dozen developers specifically for a new Dragon Age title. All signs point to BioWare's attention being far, far away from Mass Effect, and that means we can safely declare it dead, at least for the next several years, and maybe even permanently. Now, we've established death, so let's take a look at what caused it. Most people are pointing at the disaster that was Mass Effect Andromeda. For what happened there, we can take a look at the article I mentioned earlier where Jason Schreier spoke with some of the developers who worked on the game. It's a useful article, but it's not exactly groundbreaking since they just confirm what we already knew. Mass Effect Andromeda was mismanaged from the top down. They didn't have their A studio working on the game, they had the studio that had only worked on DLC before that point. They were working with the Frostbite engine, which it doesn't appear that BioWare has yet mastered. I know some people like some of the character models from Dragon Age Inquisition, but I thought they weren't very well done at all, and their poor work with that engine seemed to continue with Andromeda. Now, by all appearances, Mass Effect Andromeda is not a bad game. It just can't live up to the legacy that BioWare built. It scored a 72 for the PC version on Metacritic. Compare that to Mass Effect 2, which got a 94. Many people point to the animations, which at this point, let's face it, they're going to go down in gaming history for how bad they were and the memes that erupted as a result. That obviously did not help sales at all. Also not helping was the writing. In particular, this cringe-worthy scene where a grammar Nazi scolds the player character.
All right, what happened?
To who?
To whom? And your goddamn father. Sorry, my face is tired from dealing with everything.
This was a game that cost tens of millions of dollars, and there is simply no excuse for it to have these kinds of problems. And the only way for it to have so many of these problems is if it was mismanaged from the top down. And that's exactly what the Kotaku article confirmed. But while Andromeda was a monumental failure, I think people are putting too much emphasis on that game when looking at what happened to Mass Effect as a series. There's an even bigger failure in the series that people are either forgetting or they underestimate just how devastating its impact was. Of course, I'm talking about the infamous ending of the original trilogy. Up to this point, the series was revered and adored. Some say that Mass Effect 2 in particular is one of the best games ever made. We finally had a game where we had all these choices, and we were promised that these choices would matter. It turns out we were lied to. It turns out that our choices only made a difference in whether we got a blue explosion, a green explosion, or a red explosion. For me personally, according to Steam, I put in around 144 hours into Mass Effect 1. For Mass Effect 2, I put in over 260 hours. I like playing the game again on harder difficulty levels and trying out different choices and different classes. I played through the first game probably 4 times or so, and I played through the second game probably 8 times. After the ending of Mass Effect 3, I stopped playing the entire series, and I haven't played it since, except when they came out with that revised ending DLC. That's how devastating the ending of the original trilogy was. And when they began hyping Andromeda, I just couldn't really care. How am I supposed to get hyped for a game that screwed me over with such a disappointing finale last time? And I'm sure other gamers felt the same way. One of the aspects of the ending that's not frequently acknowledged is that it helped create this divide between the gaming media and the gamers. Actually, I don't know if it helped create this huge void between the press and the gamer, or if it just shined a light on this void. But you had all these gamers who were not happy with the ending, who wanted their grievances heard, and the gaming press actually attacked the gamers, their customers who were reading their websites or watching their videos. The most famous of these was Colin Moriarty of IGN doing a video which helped establish the stigma of the entitled gamer. Keep in mind here that at this time, Colin Moriarty worked for IGN, which was receiving a large amount of advertising revenue from BioWare. And also keep in mind that also working for IGN was Jessica Chobot, who they actually put in the game itself.
If word gets out that I got too close to a source, then I'm done.
But IGN wasn't the only ones complaining of entitled gamers. Nearly all the prominent game journalists out there voiced their displeasure when BioWare announced that they were working on DLC that would make the ending suck slightly less. There were few exceptions to that rule who were on the side of the gamers, notably Eric Kane of Forbes. So there was now this huge divide between game media and gamers, with gamers pissed off at being attacked. 2 years later, the game media went after gamers again, and gamers decided that was enough, and thus began Gamergate. So you had all this baggage, this political baggage that came with Mass Effect and BioWare, that pitted gamers versus the media. Gamergate pitted gamers versus social justice, and BioWare was firmly on the side of social justice. Most prominent among these was Manveer Air, a writer who worked on Andromeda, who seemed to gleefully tweet about his intersectional politics, where he would complain about, quote, whitey. It's hard to tell if the politics of the situation were a significant factor in Andromeda's sales, but we must acknowledge that it did cost them at least some sales. That said, I still think the ending to Mass Effect 3 cost them the most. But even if we disregard the ending, Andromeda still had the problem of not really fitting in with the series. In the original trilogy, we had a battle for the galaxy, for the very future of humanity. And here we have Andromeda, where none of that really mattered in the least. They started anew, without Commander Shepard, without the characters that we grew to love. And instead we had this new cast of characters that, frankly, they were ugly as sin. It was always an uphill climb for BioWare. They had the Mass Effect name, but they had to capture our interest all over again. They had to give us a reason to become personally and emotionally invested in this new property. They had to overcome that disaster of an ending that left such a poor taste in our mouths. It would have taken something exceptional to overcome all of those problems, and BioWare didn't even assign their A team to do it. They didn't even assign their B team. They're working on Dragon Age. They assigned their DLC devs. Some people want to put the blame on Electronic Arts, which is not entirely unfair. But at this point, I'm not sure that you can really separate the top brass of EA from that of BioWare. They're basically the same people. And let's not forget that EA didn't exactly do a hostile takeover of BioWare. The doctors who started BioWare sold out willfully, then they took off as soon as the contracts were up. At this point, I don't think it's really meaningful to separate BioWare from EA. They're all just a big corporate amalgamation. You can say that EA ruined BioWare, but I would personally call it a consensual assimilation. There are also a couple more problems I'd like to touch on quickly before ending the autopsy. First, we have a lack of innovation. This is a pervasive problem in the gaming industry as a whole, of course, and there's always the issue of staying true to the sequel while providing the gamer with a new experience. It appears that Andromeda failed in that area. The ship in Andromeda, the Tempest, it's pretty much just a less sleek version of the Normandy. The new galaxy that you explore, a completely new galaxy with new planets and all these new things, well, it's populated with mostly the same races that you've seen in every other Mass Effect game. BioWare chose to play it safe and did not offer much innovation in Andromeda, and it turns out that was the wrong decision. Now, the real question is whether they'll learn from that in their other games. After seeing Anthem and how it appears so much like Destiny with maybe some Titanfall thrown in, I have to say I'm not very optimistic. Finally, the last problem that BioWare needs to address, and it's related to a lack of innovation, is the issue of its famous relationship drama in its games. BioWare needs to decide if it wants to make relationship simulators or if it wants to make action-oriented RPGs. It can do both. It's certain that a lot of people love the relationship aspect in BioWare's games, but when you have frickin' Ben Kuchera of Polygon writing articles like this, Mass Effect Andromeda dev says game features full nudity, says it's totally softcore space porn. Pretty good banging? Pretty great banging. God, I can't believe an adult actually wrote that. If that's what major websites are writing just 2 or 3 weeks before your game is released, you have PR issues, because articles like that make me want to stay way the hell away from your game. And if we tilt back to a lack of innovation, it doesn't help that BioWare's relationship subplots have been largely the same since Baldur's Gate 2. You talk to your companion, you select the right choices, you get a sex scene, or in the older games, a successful relationship. And here you have a double-edged sword, because if you want to have sex in your video games, that's great. But then you have the problem that you need to be sexy. So that concludes the autopsy, and the cause of death is self-inflicted injury. Mass Effect Andromeda was a killer heart attack. But this heart attack, this early death, it was brought on by a toxic overdose of BioWare's own mismanagement, of resting on its laurels and not committing its best team to the project, of a disastrous ending that forever tainted a once great series. BioWare now has to worry about itself and its own image. It's still well regarded, but it failed on Mass Effect, and Dragon Age Inquisition was vastly overrated, and they could kill that series as easily as they did with Mass Effect. BioWare, the one-time king of the role-playing game, has been usurped, and has a long way to go to catch up to its competition. They better work their ass off if they want to regain that title. That's what I think. What do you think? I'm sure I missed some important aspects of the demise of Mass Effect, so let me know what it was in the comments below. As always, if you like this video, please hit the thumbs up and maybe subscribe to my channel. If you are finding value in my work and enjoy this and my other videos, then I ask that you consider donating to my Patreon or Game Objective. This has been Brad Glasgow. Thanks for watching.